As we get ready for Thanksgiving and week 12 of the fantasy season, let's first go over the fallout from week 11 and some of the big injuries that happened and who is next up to replace them. First, a reminder that this is the best time to try Underdog Fantasy because in addition to the 100% deposit match that you get up to $100 if you use our promo code ENDGAME, you also can take advantage of this week's new customer special. On Monday Night Football, that huge matchup between the Chiefs and the Eagles, if Pat Mahomes gets 1 yard or more, you take the higher on that pick, you win, pair it with any other pick that you like, and you can triple your money just like that. Check it out now, Underdog Fantasy, download the app, and use code ENDGAME to take advantage. Of course, I'm going to give you the top waiver wire pickups of the week, but first, it was just a brutal week 11. Let's talk about some of the big name injuries, starting with the first quarter of the first game on Thursday night. And it didn't take long before we saw a season ender to a top fantasy player, Mark Andrews, tight end of the Baltimore Ravens. Andrews had his ankle rolled up on one of those hip drop tackles, quickly ruled out, and now that's it. Season done. So if you're riding him at tight end, you're going to have to look for an alternative. Now the logical pivot would be the backup there, Isaiah Likely. He's in the same offense that uses the tight end quite a bit. And this is a guy who was drafted to be a receiver, very athletic prospect out of Coastal Carolina a couple of years ago. But here's the thing, and this is why I'm not going to go out and just recommend that you add him automatically. We've seen this before. Last year, Andrews was out a week and everyone was picking up Likely, and he did basically nothing. And then after that, was completely uninvolved and was dropped everywhere. Don't go spending up all your fab to use Likely. If you're in a deep league, he may just be the best thing out there that's available, but I'm going to mention a couple of other tight ends I like better that could still be there on your waiver wire. And then that same Thursday night game, another season ender. This one actually worse from a fantasy standpoint because not just the player himself, but this affects the entire Bengals offense. Joe Burrow, with that wrist injury, he's done. Now, we don't know exactly when this injury actually happened because, of course, there was this grainy footage, him coming out the plane before they even started the game, wearing something on his hand. So this maybe was a pre-existing injury. Still investigating that, but it really doesn't matter. The point is, if you had Burrow, you need a new quarterback, and Jake Browning shouldn't be it. The worst part about these first two injuries is that for a lot of leagues, the trade deadline just passed. So you may have no choice but to stream or see who the best available is on waivers. I'll help you out. And then again, the fantasy gods giveth and the fantasy gods taketh away. Just when we were blessed with the return of Devon Achane, we thought would be our savior. Just like that, he was gone too. Early in the game, Achane left with a knee injury and did not return. Now, this seems like it's the very same area of the knee, could be an MCL, so that's concerning, but at the same time, it's not serious. So next week, it seems very up in the air. I don't think it's a long term, but again, I'm not a doctor and I won't pretend to be one, even on Twitter. It was even better to see Salvon Ahmed get a touchdown in that game just to make people who started Achane and Raheem Mostert feel even better. I also won't say go out and pick up Ahmed. I mean, you could if you need some running back depth, but he's not a guy you really want to be starting next week. Aaron Jones, also a knee injury. He's been dealing with this all year. He had played the last couple of games, seemed like he was back to near full health, and now he's not. Number 3 running back Emmanuel Wilson also left the game with an injury, so it was A.J. Dillon's backfield, but as he's done for most of the year, did not produce and just didn't look very impressive on the ground. Dillon carried 14 times for 29 yards. He did catch 4 passes, but still, Dillon has just not looked effective most of the season and gets a brutal matchup next week against the Lions, and it's on Thanksgiving. I mean, sure, you could pick up Dillon, but again, I'm not going to recommend him as a must-add. And another pretty big one is Cooper Kupp. Just when they were coming off the bye and Matt Stafford was finally back, now Kupp leaves this game with an ankle injury. While it's too early for me to say definitively if it's serious, how long he'll be out, if at all, it doesn't seem like anything that should keep him out long term. Hopefully he bounces right back in week 12, but you might have to prepare to bench him. And really, without Kupp, that whole offense was a mess. I mean, Puka still looked good. He's obviously startable, but nobody else in there is even worth mentioning. And then if you happen to be a Giants fan, then you know that the G-men just can't have nice things. Darius Slayton had himself a pretty good game, and so of course he got hurt, left with an arm injury. Goes without saying, should not be interested in any Giants receivers. The Chicago Bears are now fully loaded. Justin Fields back and Khalil Herbert back, so it was going to be a 3-man running back committee, and maybe down to 2 because just like that, with Herbert back, Deontay Foreman left with an injury. This was an ankle. Again, not sure the severity, but Rashawn Johnson kind of stepped up, got more touches, looked pretty good. Still a backfield you probably just want to avoid. And Seattle suffered 2 potentially big blows, especially considering that they're playing just a couple of days on Thanksgiving night. Geno Smith got hit hard, but it looks like it's not as bad as it looked. It's going to be a bruised tricep for him. There's still danger that he misses week 12, but it'll just come down to game time decision most likely. And you know Seattle definitely wants him out there because as you saw, as soon as Drew Lock came in, didn't take long, only 6 pass attempts for him to throw an interception. And finally, Kenneth Walker left with an oblique injury. After the game, Pete Carroll said it was legit. I don't know if he thinks that's good or bad, but it doesn't sound like a good thing. Again, this is a serious injury for a running back. He's a guy who's already been battling injuries. With that short turnaround, you might have to just accept that Kenneth Walker is going to sit. But the good news is there is an obvious clear replacement who has a lot of fantasy value now. So that leads me to my very first waiver wire pickup, the top ad of this week. It's got to be Zach Charbonnet. Now, Charbonnet had been coming on anyways, and we saw over the last couple of weeks, been eating slowly into Walker's snap share and his touches, and now he might get all of the opportunities in that backfield, or almost all of them. Now let's rewind quickly to the NFL draft and Seattle being one of the first teams to take a running back in Charbonnet, and everybody being shocked because they had just taken Kenneth Walker, who had a great rookie season. But they did this intentionally, not just because of an emergency in case Walker gets hurt, not just for depth, because Charbonnet has a complementary skill set to Walker. Walker, of course, being that home run hitter, the guy who has the breakaway speed, can get through the tackles and make big plays. Charbonnet is a guy with soft hands, great knack for receiving, and this is exactly what he has been doing instead of Walker, because Walker just not the greatest receiver out of the backfield. So Charbonnet in Walker's place for the most part, week 11, 47 yards on the ground, okay, but he caught 6 passes. Only 22 yards, but again, in PPR, that's getting you double digits, and this was not a game where he was on the field completely. Walker was still in there until he got hurt. Charbonnet, with all the opportunities in the backfield, again, has a great opportunity to be a solid RB2 in fantasy lineups. Some of you out there already have him stashed, but it looks like he's available in more than half of most fantasy leagues, so definitely check. He's got to be the number 1 pickup this week. Now, with the Mark Andrews injury, I already told you I'm not that interested in Isaiah Likely unless I really have no other choice, but I am interested in a receiver who could see an uptick of targets and has already been trending up. I think it's finally time to buy into or back into Odell Beckham Jr. Now, I was actually going to mention Odell Beckham anyways in this week's waiver wire because he had already been looking good back-to-back weeks with a touchdown, and then this past week, he went for 116 yards. He's actually making big plays down the field, which is why the Ravens got him, and he's actually looking a little bit like Odell of the past. He must finally be healthy, got his speed back, at least back to what it was at this version of Odell. The most important thing is he's getting end zone looks. You know that's one of his strengths. And now with Mark Andrews out, they're going to need all the receivers to step up, and Beckham has been doing that. So at this point, yeah, I feel comfortable saying pick him up, and you can start him, maybe flex him out as soon as this coming week. The Ravens get the Chargers this coming week, and this is a very favorable matchup for receivers. Unfortunately, the Ravens still haven't had their bye. They're going to do that on week 13, but keep Beckham stashed because he's got some great upside during the fantasy playoffs. Now, you lost Andrews. You need a tight end. I'm going to start with one who may not be available in your league, but I have to mention because David Njoku was dropped in a lot of places as soon as Deshaun Watson was ruled out for the season. And if he's not out there on waivers, I suggest throwing out a trade offer if your deadline hasn't passed, because some people look at his stat line from this week and say it's not too impressive. He had 56 yards on 7 catches. Didn't get a touchdown, but he almost had one. It was in the end zone. He was just inches away from grabbing it. He was targeted in the end zone, but also more importantly, if you look, I had to double check on this. He was targeted 15 times in week 11. With Dorian Thompson-Robinson, the rookie quarterback there, we knew this would hurt Amari Cooper's value, and it did. But I didn't think it would double Njoku's target opportunities. Now, we talk about this all the time with a young and experienced quarterback. Instead of taking those chances down the field, unless they happen to be a gunslinger type and Thompson-Robinson is not, they're going to take those short, easy throws to the slot receiver, to the tight end, dump it off to the running back. Well, guess who his favorite target has been in both of his starts so far? By far, it's been Njoku. And whether or not you believe that's going to continue the rest of the season, or even whether DTR is going to be the quarterback the rest of the season, rumors of Joe Flacco looming, I still think you have to start Njoku next week, if at all possible, if you can pick him up or trade for him. He gets the Broncos next week, and right now, no team on defense has allowed more fantasy points to tight ends than the Broncos. Now, if you can't get Njoku, understandable. There's another clear target there who is available still in a lot of leagues. And again, this week's stat line not going to do anything to inspire people. In fact, we might see him dropped even more. But Pat Freiermuth was one of the most talented tight end prospects from his class a couple years ago. Had a really solid year last year. Hasn't been healthy, and so we haven't seen him do anything this season. He'd been on IR, just came back, and in his return, he got one catch. Not only that, but if you watch any of that game, Kenny Pickett, well, any of the last several games, actually, Kenny Pickett's just not it. But I'm holding out hope, at least for Muth, maybe not Pickett in fantasy, but he can get the ball to receivers to some extent. And I think we've got to give Muth especially a little bit of pass, not just because his first week back from injury, but this was the Cleveland Browns defense that they faced. And remember, Cleveland is statistically the best defense in the league this entire season. So the fact that Freiermuth didn't do anything in his first game back off IR on a road game against the best defense in the league doesn't worry me, especially because next week he gets to go against Cincinnati's defense. I just mentioned how the Broncos give up the most fantasy points per game to tight ends. Well, guess what? Cincinnati Bengals have given up the most overall fantasy points to tight ends. They're right up there, one of the worst defenses, or I should say the best to face if you're a tight end. No guarantee that Muth goes off, but you need a tight end because you had Andrews, or you just want to improve the situation that you have. Freiermuth is an obvious target. All right, now what if you have to replace Joe Burrow? Maybe you can trade, but also Chris and I always talk about this. You don't want to overpay for a quarterback if you can stream, because giving up one of those top running backs or receivers, it's just not worth it. There are a lot of really unappealing choices at quarterback these days. I'm not sure how we got here, but there's one guy who hasn't been appealing, and now I think he is. I'm going to give Jordan Love a little vote of confidence. Now, Love coming off a very strong game, 322 yards, 2 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Here's the tricky part. This was a home game against the Chargers, who've just been bad on defense. Next week, Jordan Love, very soon on Thursday night, which happens to be Thanksgiving, the first game of the week, going to go on the road to face the Lions, the 8-2 Lions. And the last time that the Packers faced the Lions this year, he didn't do too great. 246 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interception, and he was sacked 5 times. So why would I think Jordan Love would be any good for your fantasy team in Week 12? Well, a couple of reasons. First of all, what I've seen since that week especially, he's just gotten better. He's figured some things out, not forcing it to certain guys anymore, like Christian Watson, and he's letting things come to him. He's making better decisions. I just think that he's gotten some improvement. He looks a little bit more like the guy we saw earlier in the year. Second, I think they've figured some things out on the O-line here, because of the last 2 games, he's only been sacked a total of 4 times. And then, I talked about Aaron Jones getting injured. Well, they're going to have to throw the ball more. Jordan Love. Now, again, this may not be as good for them in real life, but we don't care whether they win or lose. We don't care whether he's efficient or not. We just care that he puts up volume in terms of yardage, potential touchdowns. He's going to have to pass the ball. And the other thing here is the fact that we like the Lions at home. Lions are a good team. If the Packers are playing from behind, again, this is good for fantasy. Jordan Love might put up big yardage in garbage time. I'll stop short of saying Jordan Love is a good rest of season option for you at quarterback. It really depends on your league, who else is out there. Probably streaming is your best choice, but right now, if I'm looking at Week 12 and the options that are realistic for somebody needing to replace Burrow, I'm going with Love. Now, while there are no teams on bye this coming week, There were 4 teams who were off in week 11, and we always have some players who get dropped because they were off that week, and Josh Downs might be one of them. Also, because the last 2 weeks, Josh Downs has done nothing. He left with injury the last time we saw him, so sure, some people just didn't feel compelled to stash him. With that extra time off, he should be good to go. Downs available in about half of fantasy leagues. If he's out there, I think this is a smart add. Now remember, there was a stretch there where he was looking really good from weeks 5 to 8. Downs had a total of 23 catches, 315 yards, and 2 touchdowns. And then that knee injury, left early and then missed a game. So he didn't do anything, and then the bye, so people are forgetting about him. I think he should be good to go. We're going to see something more like what we saw in the middle of the season. And once again, this is perfect timing to not only pick him up, but also potentially flex him if you need somebody, because going to face the Tampa Bay Bucks, which is a bottom 5 defense against wide receivers in fantasy. There may be a holiday coming up, but we don't take a break. We're here for you every single day to help you win in fantasy and get you ready for the full slate of football on Thursday and even a game on Friday. Check out all of our start sit videos here. Waiver wire, buy low, everything you need to help you win in fantasy.